I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell blamed Democrats on a surge in violent crime on the Senate floor Tuesday. The Kentucky Republican accused the far left of making the U.S., quote, radically softer on crime. The GOP hopes to make crime and policing a central plank in their midterm message. Listen in for more from Senator McConnell.
Mr. President.
Republican Leader.
I consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
A few months ago, from this desk, I talked about the results of a recall election in San Francisco. In February, a multilingual, multi-ethnic coalition in San Francisco stood up for common sense and rejected 3 members of the far-left school board that had prioritized woke lunacy over the basics of education. Well, last week, these same fed-up citizens provided a sequel. Even the deep blue Bay Area decided they'd had enough with their radical left district attorney, a prosecutor in name only, who'd become nationally famous for running a soft-on-crime experiment. As deaths from drug overdoses skyrocketed, his office chose to almost entirely stop prosecuting drug dealing. Burglaries shot up 50%. Chain stores had to close locations because of rampant shoplifting. One person who'd been arrested 5 times in 6 months in 2020 was let out every single time, until he killed 2 women with a stolen car. Liberals actually bragged about how they'd cut down incarceration rates, even as disorder swallowed up more and more of the city. So the citizens were fed up with being the far left's guinea pigs. They flocked to the ballot box and they voted for change. So, Mr. President, this phenomenon is not only playing out in San Francisco, it's nationwide. For years, the far left has zeroed in on local prosecutors and district attorneys as juicy opportunities to make America radically softer on crime. According to recent news reports, for example, one far-left billionaire donated more than $1 million each to the political campaigns of soft-on-crime prosecutors in Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, and Philadelphia. According to one group's analysis, the army of soft-on-crime prosecutors supported by this one donor, and his networks oversee as much as 20% of the nation's entire population. Once in office, many of these prosecutors set about abusing their authority by basically unilaterally decriminalizing various crimes that neither voters nor legislators have actually decriminalized in reality. As the Attorney General of Virginia put it recently, instead of trying to change the law, these groups are electing prosecutors who simply ignore it. As this liberal campaign has been playing out at the state and local level, we've seen violent crime surge all across the country. Here are just a few recent news reports from Minnesota. Robberies, assaults, and gun crimes are causing waves of anxiety and fear among suburban residents across the Twin Cities. From Colorado, since the beginning of the pandemic, murders have gone up 47%. Some types of property crime had nearly doubled, and the seizures of fentanyl and methamphetamine had quadrupled in just the last year. Atlanta saw a 30-year record in homicides last year in 2021, and 2022 has been looking actually even worse. At least as of a few months ago, both murders and rapes were way ahead of even that 2021 pace. Residents of Phoenix who try to use public transit to escape soaring gas prices have found out, quote, assaults and drug crime in and around public transportation have risen over the last 5 years. Philadelphia is reporting an 80% increase in assaults aboard buses. In my hometown of Louisville, we're struggling as well. Over the past several years, violent crime has sharply risen across the city, breaking gruesome records, including record homicides and assaults, and we've seen carjacking more than triple in the last 5 years. Last weekend alone, Louisville saw 3 homicides and 10 non-fatal shootings. 5 teenagers and a 9-year-old were shot during a single altercation at my hometown's Big Four Bridge. Violent criminals turned a popular attraction for families and tourists into a literal war zone. Stable prices, border security, and public safety are 3 of the most basic deliverables that any government owes to its citizens. Strike 1, strike 2, and strike 3 for Democrats at the federal, state, and local level. That explains one last headline I'll mention this morning. Americans are more worried about crime than at any other time this century. Now, on a different matter, the latest news from Ukraine confirms that our friends need more robust weaponry, and they need it fast. Outgunned Ukraine needs more weapons fast as Russia advances, officials say. Ukraine pleads for weapons, saying Russia has much more artillery. The people of Ukraine have inspired the world with their resilience, but resisting Russian aggression takes reliable supplies of lethal force. As the Biden administration continues to provide shipments and prod our allies, they must adopt the kind of strong and positive posture that has eluded them at earlier points in the conflict. As early as last November, I was urging sanctions for deterrence and pushing for NDAA provisions to send enhanced lethal aid last November. Throughout December and January, I urged the President to bolster NATO's eastern flank with more U.S. forces and get more weapons to Ukraine's forces before Russia attacked. In February, I called on President Biden to anticipate Russian manipulation of energy markets and back off his own holy war against domestic American production. But for months, the Biden administration seemed actually more focused on deterring itself than deterring Putin. Too much hesitation, too much hemming and hawing, too little preventive action in advance. The United States cannot make the same mistakes again with prolonged dithering over whether to provide longer range or more powerful weapons. That's where we are now. It's time to get Ukraine what it needs to finish this fight, including artillery and long-range rockets, and strongly and firmly push our European allies to do the same. The wealthiest European countries need to move fast to do their part. No more hesitation, and quit making excuses. This war has carried terrible human costs for the Ukrainian people. We cannot bring back the thousands who've been lost. But with strong assistance, we can help Ukraine limit future losses, reduce the risk of greater conflict, and create a deterring precedent for other would-be aggressors like China. There's another area where the Ukraine crisis has showcased the need to take decisive action quickly while there's still time. That is with respect to our own defense industrial base and our supplies of critical arms. Equipping Ukraine has seriously depleted our own stockpiles of javelins and stingers. According to the Secretary of the Army, the U.S. military has, quote, taken some risk to our own readiness. This sounds exactly like the sort of situation that prompted the creation of the Defense Production Act. But thus far, we've heard far more from Washington Democrats about using the DPA to fast-track green energy boondoggles than to expand production capacity for critical weapons and munitions. Our allies and our partners are interested in buying American military technology. This should be a win-win, allies spending their own money to strengthen themselves by buying American and making our militaries more interoperable in the process. But too often, our partners are hamstrung by American constraints on the process, like the heel-dragging bureaucracy that runs our military sales and lagging production schedules. We must adequately stockpile weapons and munitions for our own military and have sufficient supplies and production capacity to arm our friends, and we need to do this before it's too late. Building up our own stores, upgrading our allies, is the best way we can avoid nightmare scenarios down the road where America could be forced into a terrible choice between committing U.S. troops to a conflict or doing nothing. The remedy is to help our allies upgrade their military capabilities in advance. Of course, this takes money. All the serious preparations and military modernization that it will take to compete with Russia and China require resources. Tomorrow, the Armed Services Committee will mark up the National Defense Authorization Act. This is a key opportunity to show that both parties are serious about the real growth in defense spending that will take to keep us on the cutting edge. The Biden administration's defense budget request was woefully insufficient. The president proposed a real dollar cut for defense spending after President Biden's own inflation. Our colleagues on the committee must help Congress deliver an NDAA that provides for real, robust growth above inflation so that we can modernize our forces, ensure adequate inventories of critical weapons and munitions, and keep America safe.